right, a very good morning from here in New York and good afternoon in Abidjan and in Accra and Sierra Leone, across West Africa, but close to, well, late afternoon in Nigeria, and in North South Africa, it is evening. So good evening and good day wherever you are. It's another wonderful day to come your way today with the African Journalist Hangout. Today, we are connecting the continent again in having a discussion and about African matters and also the way our stories are told. Well, who will tell our stories for us except ourselves? And it is a privilege for me to have a great team that is connecting with us today across the continent to talk about one important issue, financial institutions and the role they play in our continent. But not just so. For years, African development has mostly been funded with foreign aid. And well, not to talk about their own revenues generated by our governments, but as a way of also promoting the continent's development, the African development was set up. Currently, there's a bit of controversy going around concerning the African development, and this is why we are gathered today to discuss it. The president of the African Development Bank, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, is currently battling with some allegations against him. In fact, it is fair to say that those allegations so far are not yet proven. Secondly, it is important to mention that those making the allegation call them faceless or anonymous. We do not know about who they are, but they came out with a letter outlining several allegations against the president of the African Development Bank. So far, the African Union has been a lot resolute. We have seen before this issue, we've seen several African heads of state declaring support for Dr. Adesina's governance. The West African Regional Group, ECOWAS, 15 countries have declared their support for Dr. Adesina. We've seen African foreign ministers.
Hello. Hello. I think the thing had frozen.
I think we lost him. Okay, he's back.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, thank you. I'm very honored to be joined by a team of editors across the continent to have a discussion on this matter. The African Development Bank is located in the Ivory Coast, and from Abidjan, we are joined by Selay, Marius, Kouassi. Tetteh, bonjour et bienvenue.
Bonjour, hello everybody.
Hi, good to see you,
Hello,
Selay.
how are you? Oh, good.
Good evening. Mr. Theo Abbah is in Nigeria. Obviously, the president of the African Development Bank is from Nigeria. It's also important to mention that the biggest shareholder of the African Development Bank is Nigeria, not the US, not France. The US has, the African Development Bank has some foreign support in terms of shareholders, but the biggest is Nigeria. So, Ms. Abbah, a very warm welcome to you.
Good day from Abuja. We are all fine.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Abbah. And in Ghana, we're joined by the business editor at Joy News, George Wiafe. Mr. Wiafe, a warm welcome.
Hi, monsieur. How are you doing?
Bien, merci. Bien, merci. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
And well, from Sierra Leone, in connection with also the US, we have Alpha Kamara. Alpha was producer with the BBC, editor at West Africa Democracy Radio, and currently based in the US, but he's from Sierra Leone. Alpha, a very warm welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everybody.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you. Let me just take a second to give a bit of a background on the bio of Dr. Adesina before we continue. I think it's important to set the record in terms of who the man is and what he has achieved so far, and then we can do the discussion. So here is a bit of his bio, and he has a really rich resume. So Dr. Adesina, hold a second, okay. So Dr. Akinwumi Adesina is the president of the African Development Bank and is a 2017 laureate for the World Food Prize. In 2017, he was also the recipient of the Jean White Lifetime Achievement Award for Child Nutrition. He previously served as Nigeria's Minister of Agric and Rural Development, and he implemented bold policy reforms and created a new agricultural investment program to expand opportunities for the private sector. He has received a number of global awards for his leadership and work in agriculture. A distinguished development economist and agri-development expert, he was vice president of the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, AGRA, and associate director of the Rockefeller Foundation here in New York, where he worked for a decade in senior leadership positions, including regional office director and representative for Southern Africa. Dr. Adesina was principal economist for the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture, principal economist and coordinator of the West African Rice Economics Task Force at the West African Rice Development Association, among others. And about education, he graduated in agric economics from the University of Ife in Nigeria with a PhD in agric economics at Purdue University in the United States, where he won the Outstanding PhD Thesis Award. He also won the prestigious Rockefeller Foundation Social Science Postdoctoral Fellowship in 1988, which launched his international career and global agricultural development. So, well, this is a bit of Dr. Adesina. And let me come to Mr. Abbah. So far, we've seen strong views from Nigeria coming in terms of what we are discussing. How is Nigeria taking the news with relation to Dr. Adesina's these alleged allegations or these allegations against him?
Okay, thank you very much. I want to start by saying that in Nigeria, we are shocked at the allegations that were made against Dr. Adesina. And we are all quite disturbed. So we really wanted to see the allegations made against him. And when we saw the allegations, they were not allegations about corruption. There was no allegation about self-interest, about maybe conflict of interest. It was not about waste of resources. It was not about any mismanagement of the funds of African Development Bank. The allegations were basically about past employment. They were basically about payments that were made to some staff who had left, whether it was going to be payment for somebody who was sacked or somebody whose contract had been terminated. Now, when we saw the allegations were all set, we knew that we were not going to hold water because Adesina was a man or has been a man of integrity. I never met him until 2014. I attended a seafood conference in Italy, Milan, in Italy. And at that meeting, I met a woman from Europe who was excited when she saw me that I was a Nigerian delegate. So she came to me and said, "Look, are you from Nigeria?" I said, "Yes." "So you are lucky. You are a lucky country." I said, "What do you mean by that?" He said, "Look, the Minister of Agriculture is a man of integrity. He's a very resourceful man. He's a great man. In fact, he's one of the best in agri in the world. You are lucky to have him as minister." At that time, it was almost the end of the Jonathan administration. But he did a whole lot of work as Minister of Agriculture. Then I began to monitor the impact he made. In Nigeria, he made a lot of impact. And I wasn't surprised when he was given appointment as the president of the African Development Bank. Now, I want to say that he has been accused of all sorts of ethical issues, but not about corruption. You see, and those accusations, he has defended himself. There are about 19 of them. He has defended himself. It's about perhaps a Nigerian who was employed, about another African who was employed, about another African who was given promotion, about another African who left, who was paid what he was due. So, and he defended himself against all this. So in Nigeria, we are not really disturbed now that we know the details. If we had heard that Dr. Adesina stole money from ADB or built a house from using ADB funds or bought a car using ADB funds, they were even accusing him of collecting an award. You know, an award in recognition of what he had done, at ADB and contributed to agriculture in the US. I know he was accused of collecting, going to the US to collect that award. And basically it was a recognition of his work. But that is to tell you that they couldn't find any other serious allegation against you other than to say, well, in the office, you smiled at the staff, in the office, you didn't sign a document, in the office, things like that. So we are shocked, but now that we know the details of the accusations, we are settled. Basically, it's not about corruption, not about self-interest, not about conflict of interest, not about waste of resources. It's not about mismanagement of the resources of African Bank. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Abbah. Though it's important to point out that some of them also include allegations of, more like abuse of office, including some contracts that were said to have been awarded. So that needs to be pointed out. Let me come to Selay. Selay in Ivory Coast, that is the home to the African Development Bank. And so obviously the position of Ivory Coast on all these matters, especially also the position of France. We have seen several of the allegations come in, and often you see them published by French media before it even comes out from Jeune Afrique and the rest. And obviously we know the French role on the continent and for a financial institution like this. So like, how is the story being covered in the Ivory Coast? And so far, are there any official statement or position of the Ivorian government?
Well, so far, let's say that the official position of the Ivorian government has yet to be made. And it is the press which has been covering the issue, and everybody is taking it seriously here in this country. I'm not going to exaggerate by saying that more than 90% of, local press think that this thing is happening because Dr. Adesina is seeking another term. At the head of the African Development Bank, and they think that all the allegations are not really serious, as they come from a very mysterious whistleblowers within the institutions. So I would like to say that we have mixed feeling about the issue, but those who think that the doctor all these things is happening because the doctor is standing on the way of the US, outnumber those who think that these allegations should not be taken as seriously.
I see. Thank you so much, Selay. George, you have been covering a lot of financial and also bank issues, including attending the World Bank summer events or World Bank events, annual meetings, and all the rest. How has the story been covered in Ghana, and are there any official responses yet from Ghana that we know?
Not that I am aware. In terms of following my colleague from Ivory Coast and Nigeria, I don't think that it's one of those stories that have made the front pages and the headlines, even though normally we would all want to cover it. So it hasn't been a big issue here in Ghana because we are all thinking about our COVID-19 and how it's hitting hard on the economy and restrictions and all those things. So in terms of a great attention, even in the newsroom, yes, we talk about it, but there's one of the stories that you put at the back page or maybe the middle page or something. But I think that you would also want to look at it in a two-way thing, that whether these allegations are founded or not, there is no smoke without fire. And for me, what has been the approach of the African Development Bank in dealing with this when it came up, whether it was good to set up an independent commission or an external party to look into it, just to clear this thing once and for all. I think that even the approach in dealing with this complaint, wherever it's coming from, whether frivolous or not, it's sometimes good to deal with these issues passionately, independently, to deal with all the doubts so that we move forward. I think that how it was dealt with, because if an accusation is made against someone in an institution, you first want to look internally. After that, could it bring it to an external party to look at it and ensure that indeed we've done it thoroughly, we've addressed all those concerns, and we move on. So I think that maybe the approach and also responding to this allegation didn't help that much, whether it's frivolous, whether it's justified or not. But maybe the person could also have a concern. Let's deal with this once and for all, and let's move on.
Good. Thank you, George. Alpha, so far, Sierra Leone was one of the earlier countries also to come out and say, we believe in the governance of President Adesina as head of the African Development Bank. so far, how are the responses coming from Sierra Leone in relation to these allegations?
Yeah, well, thank you, Benjamin. Good morning all, or good afternoon for some of you out of the US. And yeah, and you know, Sierra Leone is just a small, a country with a small economy. So whenever the big guys in Africa speak, so Sierra Leone will just toe the line normally. And also, let me just highlight that the Africa Development Bank is one of the major donors supporting the country. Even during the Ebola outbreak, a few years down the line, one of the biggest donors was the African Development Bank. So I've not had like, you know, the kind of strong impact. And normally when these things happen, you know, these big countries, they also come around the small countries to join the line. And I think what is very important, like George mentioned, I think it's an ethical issue. If an integrity question has been raised, the leadership of Dr. Adesina, definitely when they say whistleblowers, there are things that they should not let go like that. And mind you, there was an internal investigation that says he was found not guilty of all these allegations. But I just want to reinforce my colleague, the first person who spoke, said there is nothing of corruption, or there are some allegations of corruption. There are allegations of him even favoring Nigerians into top positions in the organization and in the bank, and also giving contract to some of his friends and people closer to him and some of these things. I don't have any problem with his integrity. He has done a very positive job throughout the years. I think I met him in France, 2015, during the UN climate change conference. Yes, COP21. COP21, okay. Yes, the UN climate change conference. You know, he was one of those brilliant leaders who spoke very well, and I admired him. He was very clear with his strategies. But I think when these things happen, integrity questions are raised. It is but necessary that they should be looked into. If he is not guilty, whatever, then he will be exonerated. But also, I think now the tension is now just building between, because when the Nigerian president issued a statement that we are supporting Dr. Adesina because we believe in what he has been doing for the bank, and over here the US is saying no, and then you have Sweden and I think Norway and other countries now, they say, oh, okay, we stand behind the US for this thing to be investigated and something like that. I just want us to bring the normal picture of us. If it is genuine, I know the US is sometimes, they like controlling things. They want to be the police of the world, telling people what to do and those kind of things. But normally, let's just allow the investigations to go on. If it's not like a witch hunt, then and see if the man is, you know, that man has been in that position for a long time. And like, he has been working all his life, trying to build his legacy. So I believe in him, and I know he's a man of integrity. But otherwise, if the US is pushing, then maybe we should just allow that to be done, and we all will satisfy ourselves. I know when it comes to the people who will go in to investigate, they will have to consult other countries in Africa and other countries in Europe. But as it stands, it seems that the countries over here in the West are more pushing, while the countries in Africa are like, this man is good, let us allow it to happen. And we all know this kind of tendency of corruption on the continent. That's a fact. So I don't want us to see that way, like it's Africa against the US or the rest of the world. But let us think that for integrity purposes and for the development of the region, if that's the best option, so be it.
Good. Thank you, Alpha. Of course, much as it's not a matter of pitching Africa against the rest of the world or against the US, it's also important Africa to have its own clear path. And so far, what is obvious is through Dr. Adesina, one of the things, and Mr. Abbah, I'm going to come to you and find out from you what the Nigerians think is the reason, what is the undercurrent in these allegations against Dr. Adesina. But it's also clear to say that so far, everyone who speaks has no doubt that under Dr. Adesina, the African development has seen clear difference in terms of from leadership, in terms of pushing African agenda, in terms of supporting African initiatives. And obviously the African Union's position is to have a strong and independent institution, but also dependent or independent of any foreign support as much as possible. Mr. Abbah, let me come to you. What is the responses, or what are the responses coming? Why will these things be coming now when it's obvious that Dr. Adesina is going to seek re-election this year?
Okay, I think the major fact is that the United States will not want him to continue as president of African Development Bank. But going down memory lane, we know that in 2015, his candidature did not receive the support of the United States. They didn't want him, or maybe a Nigerian, let me put it that way, to be the president of the African Development Bank. And over this period, perhaps, this is hypothetical now, they expected him to have, behave in a manner that will not put him in a position for re-election. But all over Africa, his integrity, his sincerity, and his commitment to AfDB is very apparent all over Africa. If you go from one part also to another, you see investments in agriculture, investments in issues that will help development. You see, because the objective of AfDB is to foster development in Africa. You're like another World Bank, let me put it that way, but they're supposed to invest in infrastructure, invest in those things, partner with government to invest in those things that will help the development of Africa. And I think he has done all this effectively. So at the point when he was supposed to have been re-elected, the whistleblower, an insider after would say, oh, if this guy continues, then the income of the United States will not be protected. But from what I heard, I have not confirmed it. From what I heard, the United States is not finding it convenient that Africa is inching towards China on many issues. And you see, the African Development Bank or Adesina, is one of the characters that tends to support the position of the relationship between Africa and China. Now, I understand that Americans are not happy. They are not finding it, something that will foster their own interest in Africa. That China is taking over Africa, and issues, that perhaps should be given to Americans to handle are being diverted to China. Now, I'm saying that these are conspiracy theories who are speaking in this manner. But if you look at the most of Africa, when Africa needs cheap loan, let me put it that way, it's like they go to China. China comes in to work on their railways, to work on infrastructure, and I think to some extent, they get the support of AfD, African Development Bank. And I understand that why America is not happy with addition. Now, technical. But if you look at it critically, a whole lot of projects are being handled in Africa by China, and it's like the West, let me say, US and Europe, they are actually losing out. When we're talking about projects in Africa. Now, when you don't have projects in Africa, you are going to lose your control. You are going to lose how you dictate to African leaders. And those are some of the Europeans we don't want to do. Now, as I said again and again, it is not on the table to say these are the specific issues. But this is the feeling that we have all around us.
The feeling that you have in Nigeria.
Yes, that's from government, those in government, ministers in government, and those who are close to Adesina. Those are some of the signals they are sending out, that Americans are not feeling comfortable with the relationship in Africa and China. Are being handled by African Development Bank. You see, Adesina is there. So those are some of the things that we have heard.
Right. Thank you, Ms. Abbah. Let me come to prior to Mr. Adesina coming into office, the African Development Bank has done a lot in terms of reforming. In fact, the 2015 election that brought Dr. Adesina into power saw one of the most clearest in terms of elections at the African development level. something that even the World Bank and the other international institutions, the American Bank, haven't even had it. Let me take the view of this man, Bob Pittman. I'm going to play this sound briefly, and then we can discuss, which is, he was talking about how the how the African Development Bank conducted its election. For the first time, they had seen so much transparency in the process through which that election was conducted. Bob Pittman was at the US Treasury. He was a special advisor to President Bush on Africa, and he followed the election. In fact, he was in Abuja, he's in Abidjan in 2015 when the elections was conducted. Let's hear his view as he spelled it out briefly.
It's very unusual for the MDB process. I was at Treasury about 10 years ago going through the elections at the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, and African Development Bank. And I thought these elections were quite unique in the sense that the African Development Bank Twitter staff was tweeting out the results of each election before even some of the rumors hit the exterior room. So I found that to be quite impressive, although it made some of us less relevant in the Twitter sphere as we wanted to try to scoop the news. So it was very exciting.
So does that strike you as an organ?
Okay, well, so yeah, a lot of times when these institutions conduct elections, for example, we hardly get to know the details. But here was the first time one big financial institution that decided that we will make our electoral process transparent. Selay, this is why I want to come to you in terms of the reforms that we have seen over these days in the African Development Bank, which has to do with some of the changes that the African Development brought, and also the fact that they're trying to now be inward looking, in other words, generating resources locally as well. Mr. Abbah mentioned the role of China. Selay, if you are with us, I want to know what you see in terms of the changes that the African Development Bank has brought, but also particularly under Dr. Adesina. Okay, as we wait for Selay, George, do you want to jump in terms of reforms, or what has impressed you so far in terms of the governance of Dr. Adesina?
I think that just like any institution, the African Development Bank itself has gone through or been through a lot of reforms. And for me, I think that is very, very important. But I remember once I was at their annual meetings and I was going through their shareholding. I asked myself, wow, what are all these countries doing as shareholders of African Development Bank? But in the global village, you can no longer be practicing isolation and think that it has to be all about Africa. But it raises a very, very important point, is whether Africans themselves are committed to building strong institutions and building strong financial institutions, building strong governance institutions to help govern the continent and even Africa as a whole. Take a typical look at ECOWAS and all the problems that we are having, and the fact that, look at our markets, African free trade area. I asked myself, will this thing succeed? Time will tell. So if we had more African countries committing more resources to the African Development Bank, we wouldn't have been forced to go to the US or China or Sweden or whatever for them to support us to convert these investments into equity or shareholding. That doesn't mean that if something is wrong, we shouldn't see. But I think that it's our lack of support for our own institutions that will give room for foreign firms to come in. And when they come in, you plays the piper calls the tune. I mean, things that you might seem to be normal in Africa, but it's not normal in Europe. Corruption, yes, it's corruption. But I mean, for some people, even if you remember in some foreign countries, if you give somebody a tie or a gift more than $20, you're supposed to declare it. Right. It's the same thing in Africa here, where items more than $100 are not accepted. So I think that the most important thing is that let us build our institutions. Africans, we have what it takes, we have the resources. Let us build our institutions, because that's the only way out. If we are not committed to building our own institutions, if we don't want to pay taxes, obviously foreign firms will come in and they will ensure that certain things are done. I think for me, that's the most important thing, that as we all preach independence and what have you, and we chant, and because he's been very, very outspoken. I mean, I followed Adesina recently, and I was worried about it. outspokenness to World Bank, US, and has to do with a paradigm shift from development procedures and all the rest. Yes, you get tough when you know that you have what it takes in terms of resources to back you. You don't get tough at these big nations when you know that they are sponsoring or financing your institution. So for me, I think that what this thing has exposed all of us is that, listen, our institutions will not be built for us by foreigners. Having China to come and finance AU headquarters, that is serious. Where is the African countries building their own institutions? We still are in the era where we think that somebody should do it for us. We are in the era people already think that, oh, it was slavery, it was colonialism, so it's our time to benefit. If we don't want to pay taxes to build our own economies, it is not US, it is not China that will build our economies for us for free. They come with an interest, they've built an African Union for you, obviously, but they will dictate the pace. They want a market for their raw commodities. And don't forget, when you walk out to the market and you buy a good out there, you are generating employment for someone in China and not your own economy. So for me, I think it's very, very important that if we shout independence, if we shout Africa is for Africans, then let's also do what we have to do. If we are really committed to African Union, if you're really committed to about Africa unites and all the rest, it's about doing what we have to do. Let's put our money where we're supposed to put. Let's commit ourselves to African independence and commitment by doing what we have to do. Look what has happened to the ECO and the French bloc and the Anglo bloc. And we know where the French bloc and the connections are coming from. And that is very, very, very unfortunate. So in one breath, if you want to preach independence, then let's know that becoming independent comes not just speaking about it, but also taking certain pragmatic steps to ensure that your independence is supported by certain things.
Interesting. Thank you so much, George. Yeah, obviously every funding or every donor has its own interest. That is obviously clearly stated. Let me now mention something. Well, first of all, to those who are joining us on our social media, watching us on Facebook and YouTube, we say we thank you for joining us. We'll definitely welcome your comments and your views. Please feel free to get in touch and we'll read them out and point them out. The discussion today we're having is about the African Development Bank and its president, Dr. Adesina Akinwumi, who is being, well, investigated as we speak now because the bank has decided that, yes, it's going to take up the investigation. And in fact, it came out of a letter that was written by some anonymous staff. And obviously, one of the strongest proponents of that is the US. We've seen France also towing that line, sort of. So this is the discussion we're having. And there is something I wanted to read about some of the allegations that have come out. One, it says, in fact, it's been lengthy, one from preferential treatment. And Dr. Adesina actually took steps. He wrote lots and lots and lots of responses trying to discount all the claims made against him. Do they stand? Well, we will leave it to that team investigating to come out. But this is one. One is called, it was on preferential treatment. According to the anonymous letter, they said in the new organizational chart introduced by President Adesina, the Nigeria country office is now an autonomous entity. While Nigeria is the largest AfDB country, it is not clear that this justifies preferential treatment. And in response, this is what Dr. Adesina said. He said the decision to open a country department in Nigeria was taken by the board of directors under the leadership of President Kaberuka, my predecessor. So Kaberuka of Rwanda, he was there before Adesina. He said this decision to open a country office in Nigeria was taken before I came into office. I cannot have violated the code of ethics for implementing a decision of the board. It was a board decision taken before I took office. So such an allegation bears the deepest marks of a gratuitousness. Selay, I don't know if we are with us for now. We lost you a while ago. If you're back with us, I would have loved to have your view, especially as host country. Well, Abbah, what do you have to make in terms of this allegation, especially the location? And that's one of the issues that were said. Again, they were like Nigeria, because he's Nigerian, he seems to be favoring Nigerian contractors, something that you mentioned.
Yeah.
What do you make of his response to this allegation?
That's a good point. And actually, even before I say that, Benjamin, all of us, we know the IMF, the World Bank, these are not the best donors for Africa. We've been saying this. And when you look at the loans they give, like they just give the government like some kind of a trap. And if I give you an example, I remember I was working as a local facilitator for some of the HIPIC, remember the HIPIC project or HIPIC funded projects, heavily indebted poor countries. For example, if I'm carrying a heavy baggage here, you say, okay, Alpha, I'll help you, but just put it here on your shoulder, which means like you're not helping me in a way. I'm putting it here and it still bothers me, and you say, put it here, or something like that. Because I remember when they say, oh, we'll pay you to recruit teachers, that's the government of Sierra Leone, but don't recruit more than 35,000. You know, that's crazy. Or that time the government was fighting the war, they say, we'll give you money, but don't use the money to buy guns and fight the war. Go and build schools. How can people build schools? So this kind of, sketchy kind of stuff. So I know some of them are not happy with the African Development Bank. And definitely, I think one of the banks, I don't know if it was the Asian Bank or the World Bank, was saying, oh, the African Development Bank is too quick to give loans. Sometimes they don't follow a lot of restrictions or something. So of course, I know Dr. Adesina is a Pan-Africanist and he believes in the development of Africa. So that can be an issue. And also the issue of China, China, they are like business people. They come to Africa to invest. They don't interfere in any governance. They don't poke their noses in other things. They come and give the money. So I'm sure some other lenders will not be happy with them because they are taking over the African continent. But back to the issue you pointed, I think that's a fair response. If that man says, my predecessor outlined or set up this particular mechanism, I have to follow if I'm in. You cannot tell me because my predecessor put this, when I come, I should change it. So if the predecessor recommended that there should be an autonomous office in Nigeria, he can't come and change that because he's a Nigerian. And also, Benjamin, to be honest with you, in West Africa, like I say, these big countries, well, they have a lot of, qualified people, they are more populated. But I think, I believe in the integrity of Dr. Adesina, even though this is not good for him as we are moving on to the next elections, even though also under governance practices, he's the only candidate. Does this mean there is no other qualified candidate to contest against him in Africa? That's maybe for another point of discussion. But I think, of course, all the donors, they have their interest. Definitely, the US is saying because they have their interest. They are one of the key partners or funders of the African Development Bank. So at the end of the day, if it is done for the interest of the Africans and the African continent, fair enough. Or if it is done maybe just to fulfill some personal or selfish interest, then it becomes a problem for all of us as Africans.
Thank you, George. I want to put the next allegation, which I think is something that you could have a say in, or at least give us an idea, which is that they are accusing him of lobbying and campaigning. And one of the points is that he was traveling. Obviously, as a president of the African Development Bank, he's visited various countries. And the allegation is that he's using these travels for his political lobbying. That's what they said. They said to gain support for his re-election for a second term and to stifle competition. That's what the whistleblower said. In response, he said, he's questioning he says he accused his critics of questioning the integrity, leadership, and honesty of 16 African presidents and ECOWAS who gave him their support at the end of December last year. Adesina also recalled that in February 2020, he obtained the unanimous support of the Executive Council of the African Union, composed of 55 ministers of foreign affairs, following the wobbly logic of the whistleblowers. And one could deduce, according to him, that I bribed all the 55 country presidents, he's questioning. And he said this allegation show a degrading contempt for Africa, Africans, and African leaders. That was his response. George, I mean, fairly, even the World Bank, if there are elections coming, all the financial institutions, we see people going around, but not so. As a big funding partner to Africa, the president of African Development Bank goes to some of these countries and they're accusing him of lobbying and campaigning. What do you think?
Well, Ben, for me, I want us to move this discussion away from them against us and try to classify foreign countries as imperialist and all the rest and all the rest.
No,
What are the
specific to the
rules?
issue of
Yeah,
lobbying
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
campaigning.
yeah, yeah. I'm
Because
saying that
this
what
is
are the rules? What
out
are the
initially
rules?
from
Yeah, Ben. What are the rules
yes.
of the African Development Bank when it comes to re-election? Did Adesina violate those things? And for me, that's the most critical thing. I don't know the rules of the AfDB when it comes to seeking re-election, that is a president barred from going out soliciting for campaign and all the rest. If that is clearly outlined in the laws of the African Development Bank and he did flout it, then there's a concern there.
In this case, there is nobody is campaigning against. He's the only candidate. So I don't even.
Yeah. But I understand.
We don't know yet, Alpha. We don't know yet. Before he came, he faced a tough competition from someone from Cape Verde, someone from Zimbabwe, and in fact, several others also have their interests. Especially, I know France, for example, France and the US were pushing for the Cape Verdean. Others were also pushing for the Zimbabwean. We do not know yet who else was going to contest against him. So it wasn't clear yet that it was unanimous, Alpha. But because he's the president and the incumbent, he came out early and he said he would seek re-election. And majority of the African states backed him. So it is clear to say he hasn't, I think so far there is no clear that he has denied anyone, which he cannot because there is an independent body. George, please proceed.
Yeah, so I'm saying that what are the rules, and maybe I've not gone through specifically on the rules of re-election. So if the African Development Bank rules actually bars a certain president from doing that, then we have to look into it. I'm saying that for me, don't give anybody an ammunition to use it against you. After the internal investigations and you still realize that they were not happy, nothing stopped the AfDB board from commissioning an independent body to look into these things and bring the matter to rest. If the member countries believe that Adesina is the best person to lead the African Development Bank, let's give him all the support. Are these things an institutional problem? Are these things breaches that he led? Can those corrections be made to ensure that you limit the president's powers in doing all these things? Let's also look at further institutional reforms. And for me, I think that's the most important thing. So if it was clear in the rules that don't even go, you shouldn't be seen lobbying even in your vessel, because when you travel, it's supposed to be on the ticket of the African Development Bank, going out to promote projects and not about your person. And I think that's very, very important. We should look at that. If it's clear that indeed he breached those rules, then let's look at it. And for me, I think that he has nothing to hide. So let's clear all these doubts and then move on.
Right. Okay. So yes, please, Abbah. Please, I was going to come to you, Ms. Abbah. Proceed, please.
Okay. The issue is that when we talk about an election, there's no election without lobbying. I don't know if African Development Bank has rules that say, if you don't seek re-election after 5 years, or if you want to seek re-election, don't lobby. But I can't imagine any election without lobby. Even when we were in the university, if you wanted to become a student union leader, not even president, you must lobby. You see, so I don't think there's anything wrong with additional lobbying. And I feel that, you see, if he didn't perform well, we have very good Africans. We have African leaders who have integrity, who look at him and say, look, gentlemen, you didn't do well. Go and sit down. You see, like, what the feeling I have not done research into some of the achievements he has made, but the feeling I have over this period is that he has done a whole lot of work in Africa. You see, like in Nigeria, he has contributed, the AfD has contributed a lot to power generation, power distribution. Even the current issues about the power transmission, there's kind of known from the AfDB. But it is not only for Nigeria. There are several other African countries. He has intervened in, maybe in issues that has to do with Ebola. Somebody talks about Ebola. Those are some of the things that AfDB should do. They have intervened in agriculture. They have intervened in several, even skills development and job creation. AfDB has intervened all over Africa over this period. So I think this is my own position, this is my own opinion. I think because of the achievements he has recorded, You know, many African leaders will say, why do you change the winning team? Why don't you allow him to continue? That has been their position. And I think that is why, even in Nigeria, the Buhari administration told him, look, I know you didn't belong to my party. You are of the People's Democratic Party. I'm of the PDP, or of the All Progressive Congress, APC. But because of your achievement, because of what we have heard about, your reputation all over Africa, I am going to support you. Now, in Nigeria, politics is almost in everything. But as far as this is concerned, he has been singled out, to say, you have performed so well, so we are supporting you, even instead of the fact that you don't belong to a political party. So I'm feeling that he has made impact in Africa, and that is why African leaders are supporting him. And I cannot imagine any politics in the office at the Daily Trust here. To become a union chairman, you have to go and lobby everybody. You go to editors, you go to reporters, you talk to them. So I don't see any reason why anybody wants to become or wants to continue as president of African Development Bank would not go around to say, look, I am interested in this position. Now, to say he bribed them is an insult, actually. Because
yes.
African Development Bank is looking for money,
yes.
from this country.
Ms. Abbah, it is even clear to mention that in their statement, they didn't say he bribed them. They only said that he was traveling around African continent and he was using that opportunity to lobby. Of course, that's the question. George was saying he doesn't think that, or he doesn't know what the statement, the
status of the AfDB says.
The ethical guidelines and the legalities relating to that. But it is clear, Mr. Abbah, to mention that they didn't accuse him of even bribing the African leaders. But he is saying, if you tell me all these African leaders have thrown their support behind me, and you think that I went there lobbying them, then that is unfair. I mean, he basically debunked that. Ms. Abbah, maybe let me ask you briefly again, as we will be winding up very soon. But in Nigeria, what is the next steps? What do we see? Is he going to just say, all right, let me just submit myself to the procedure, as George was calling, for example, that why doesn't he just go through the process? In fact, initially, he was cleared. He was cleared of those malpractices.
Okay. I think the issue that at the ADB, there is an internal audit department.
Yes.
And this audit department is not about finance alone. It's about every procedure within the ADB, including issues of ethics. So they had cleared it, and now I think the board met and they say, well, because some members are complaining about ABCDEF, let there be an independent investigation. And so that is where we are now. And he is not saying there shouldn't be. He's not standing the way of an independent investigation. He has surrendered everything to the independent investigator, who has given between 2 and 4 weeks to carry out an independent assessment of what the allegations have been made, and maybe do a report back to the board. So I think he's not struggling with it. And if eventually before August, the independent investigator submits his report, and the report say, oh, you are not qualified to contest as ADB president, I think he wouldn't struggle. It is not a monarchy. You cannot sit there as president. You will accept it. But from all indications, from what we have read, because I have a copy of the responses, I have a copy of most of these interactions. I don't think what the US is saying will hold too much water.
I see. You don't think it will hold too much water. I'm going to come around finally and maybe talk about final words and what you project ahead, whether this allegation is going to hold any water or not. Alpha, one thing I want to ask of you. I was thinking I was going to ask of Selay. Unfortunately, we can't seem to have Selay. He sent a message. He's been losing us with, I think, the audio quality. So, but one of the allegations that came, in fact, from France is that President Adesina, the president of the African Development Bank, obviously he speaks multi languages, and including French. His French is good. He conducts interviews in French, and yet France, the allegation from France was that even in Abidjan, he hardly uses French. And it was one of those allegations that came out of French newspapers. Of course, we know France and the role it is still its stranglehold on a lot of the African And for the fact that the African Development Bank is based in Abidjan, somehow they expect that he would conduct his business, daily business in French or whatever it is. But Alpha, I'm putting it also because you have also been based in Senegal for quite a while. We worked together in Dakar. And I mean, should that be an issue in the first place?
Definitely, it's not, because of course, Benjamin, you and me know that France is one of the biggest problems of Africa. Of course, they are the biggest. One of the biggest problems of Africa is France, because even though they ended this colonial rule, but their hands are still in there. They have the CFA franc, you know, the issue of the ECHO and the CFA. I think that's not an issue, because that man speaks French. Like I told you, the first time I met him was in 2015 during the UN Climate Change Conference in Paris. It was held in Paris during President Obama and all these things. They were all there. He spoke in French in one of the press conferences. So I know he speaks French very well. So, and even that is not an issue, because if that man speaks French, I know you will say Africa, we have a lot of countries, French-speaking countries. We have other people who are doing things. This is just about the head, somebody at the head, you know, taking decisions for something. So for me, for even that one to surface, how does that be an ethical issue? So these are all these little things, you know, when you sometimes want to put somebody so down that you start putting all kind of silly things that are not even supposed to be there. So if you talk about ethics and you talk about French, speaking French language, and the man speaks French, then what are you saying? So the whole thing, like I said earlier, is if it's genuinely done in the interest of all of us, that's fine. But the way things are going now, the way I'm seeing all these bigger powers are putting their interest, even for all these countries to say, oh, we support the US. It was so quick for Sweden, Norway, and all these countries say, oh yeah, we are buying US and want an investigation. And it's as if you don't even believe in internal structures of the organization. Right. Internal investigation, they found a man not wanting. Now you say, no, we want an external investigation. Can someone leave, for example, from Ghana and come and do an external investigation on the US government, for example, or an organization working here in the US? Is it possible? You know, these are the things, but...
Well, that is if Ghana has a share in the US government. Well, let me read some comments that were coming from Seychelles. We're about to wind up. In Senegal, Bao Quinn, it's saying, is there any particular reason why the US would have a grudge against the AfDB president that would warrant their stance about the investigation? Is it just because he's a candidate, or are there serious questions about his management of the bank? I hope so far, at least some of the comments address that issue. David Yanks in Ghana says, but what are our African leaders doing and not speaking up? I agree with George. Where is Africa in building the AfDB such that we would have to still depend on foreign donors or the West for building our bank, and he said it is pathetic. Daniel Tetteh Chokbo says, this is a great initiative. Carry on, my people. Elevate Africa. Thank you all for the comments. Thank you, Abena, Amponsewa. Thank you, Apia Bright, Kofi Abochi, Christopher Pang, and all those who are following us. We appreciate your time with us. Let me read this briefly and then we can conclude. In December, the president, Dr. Adesina, announced this, and I think it's important, as we mentioned it, to also highlight. He said, the bank, the African Development Bank, announced a giant capital increase of $115 billion. That's about 103 billion euros, the largest in the history of the bank, to accelerate the development of the continent. And Dr. Adesina called it a historic day for the bank and a joyful day, as he announced it in a press conference in Abidjan. He said this is 125% increase in the bank's capital. And the capital of the African Development Bank will go up from 93 billion to $208 billion over 10 years, from 2020 to 2030, he specified. And he said this will increase and give us a lot of resources to go further in the development of our continent. So this was Dr. Adesina speaking about one of the biggest in terms of giant steps taken by the bank, which obviously has impressed a lot, and based on which, of course, among others, which the African continent was solidly rooting behind him. As we conclude, and I want to seek your views on the election, let me mention this, the board of the bank and the electoral process, there are about 81 countries who are currently on the African Development Bank, including all the 54 countries of Africa. But obviously, there are some external supporters, the US, France, a few European countries. And so together, the AfDB is controlled by the executive board, which is represented by the member countries. Voting power of the board is split according to the size of your share, so your contribution. And currently, it is 60-40. 60% of the bank's share sources. The largest African Development Bank shareholder, as I mentioned, is Nigeria, and they have 9%. They have 9% of the vote. All member countries of the bank are represented on the AfDB. So well, and as we know, Mr. Adesina was the number 8. His immediate past or his predecessor is Donald Kaberuka. He had 2 terms. He's from Rwanda, and then he came to Nigeria. And he came, in fact, right from the beginning, his idea is, let's see how we can raise resources internally. Obviously, it seems to have, it hadn't gone well with some of the external sources. And in fact, the comment coming so far is obviously pointing to the fact that, yes, probably a lot of the foreign support, once they contribute, will also want to make those decisions. So as we conclude, George, where do we go from here? Do you see Dr. Adesina standing? Is he going to be able to go through this and contest for a second term?
I mean, once you have the largest shareholder being behind you, I think he would sail through. But maybe this might not be the last leg of Dr. Adesina's political career or governance career, maybe moving on to other things. So therefore, you want to ensure that all these allegations are clear, because you want to go into your second term very strong. And I feel he's a great guy. I've had interviews with him before on 2 or 3 occasions. I mean, one in Accra, we sat in the hotel room that he was, and he's a great guy. And for me, I would wish him well. I wish that AfDB would not be his last leg of governance in Africa and even at the global level. So for some of these petty things, you want to clear them and make sure that you're going into your second tenure with a clean sheet. And that is why, for me, it is very, very important how we find ways to deal with these things. To say that somebody is not bilingual or doesn't use a bilingual language in official duty, again, it comes back to my question: what are the rules of the African Development Bank in carrying out things? Has he flouted? I mean, that's weird. To accuse somebody of not communicating in another language in a country that is supposed to be bilingual. So for me, I mean, obviously, any independent person coming in to investigate this will brush this aside. And for me, it is very critical that you go into your second tenure having cleared all these allegations, that you have the moral right, you have the moral authority to govern. So I think he will stand as long as Nigeria is behind him. And if Nigeria moves, obviously, you have the other African countries being behind him. And for me, I think he's going to stand. But these other petty things, let's find a way to address. Just like the World Bank. I mean, when the US said there was a call to push for a developing country had to have opportunity, it didn't happen because USA wanted to have their way.
Because US, yes.
And then that's why it comes back to
Europe also having a hold on the IMF.
I mean, there was a push by Nwela Ogonja and all the rest. Let's have people like that be at the World Bank. The USA, as the largest shareholder, had their way. So this is a time for us to also call the shots. But let's ensure that the right things are done. Adesina is a fine gentleman. I mean, having spoken to him, and I wish him well. I wish he gets a second term on a clean sheet and govern and turn around the AfDB to be a very strong financial institution in Africa.
Solid, George. Thank you. Alpha. Oh no. Okay. Maybe let me, Miss Abbah. Let me come to you, and then I'll come to Alpha finally. Where do you see this going? And obviously, the largest shareholders, Nigeria, is solidly behind Adesina. We had President Buhari. In fact, I was going to read that message. I missed it. I should have read it. He tweeted and he sent a statement strongly saying, "We are fully behind President Adesina as head of the African Development Bank." We heard from former President Olusegun Obasanjo dismissing the claims against him. and calling it as foreign interference. As where do we go, and what do you see? Is he going to stand? Is he going to clear this hurdle and be able to contest for a second term?
Well, I know that Adesina has been quite careful, because he must have been preparing for a second term. Very careful about how he operated. So when these things came up, if you read some of his reactions, you would say, look, this is an administrative issue. The HR handled this, the vice president handled this. So I'm feeling that I strongly believe that he will get a second term. America will not be happy about it. And it will be the first time that America will pull out of an international or a multilateral organization. Look at what they are doing to WHO. Look at what they are doing to all over. So I wouldn't be surprised if America decides to say we can't go forward with AfDB if Adesina is there. But I foresee African leaders say, look, without America, let us go forward. So a whole lot has been achieved under his tenure. I don't know how much can be traced back to America. But then it's like there are other opportunities that can be explored if America pulls out. So I foresee America pulling out. I foresee Adesina getting the second time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Abbah. Alpha, your final thoughts.
Yes, I think it's an interesting moment for all of us. And I think at the end of the day, and maybe not even only Nigeria, Benjamin, even the other biggest economy nation in Africa, which is South Africa,
yes,
have also followed Nigeria to say,
yes,
we stand firmly behind Adesina, and we think he has done a great job for the continent, and we still believe in his integrity. So Nigeria, South Africa, they are now behind Adesina, which means like the two bigger powers in Africa. And those small countries, of course, most of them, they say, we are with you because...
And some are not even small.
Exactly.
I mean, in West Africa, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal,
yes,
Nigeria, and obviously, we are still waiting for official comment from Senegal and Ghana, but no, Ivory Coast has thrown the support.
Yeah, I think
East
so.
Africa too, yes.
Yes, and so I think the next step would be if the US, for example, says we don't trust the leadership of Adesina, maybe the best they will do, they will say, we will pull out, either we'll stop our funding to the Africa Development Bank until this man is still there because we don't trust him. Maybe that's what he will do. But if these countries are behind him, definitely he will succeed. He will go for a second term. But what will happen also, if, for example, the US, which is one of the key funders, they say, okay, we are holding back our funds because we don't trust this man. How will we sail through? So now it's about maybe reasonable heads coming together and see a possible outcome of this, maybe convincing the US for them to believe that, yeah, this is genuine or whatever. That is, if they're also genuine in what they are saying, they don't just have other things they are pushing for, then we'll all work for the development of Africa. But now, that man, like me, for one, I believe in him. I believe he has high integrity and even has potential of maybe going further in the world or international politics or something. So he will not mortgage his integrity with the Africa Development Bank only.
It's even interesting, the descriptions. In one of the headlines I read, even the BBC, what they described, which I found interesting, was the headline they wrote about flamboyant head of the African Development Bank. And you want to wonder, yes, Dr. Adesina dresses, and anyone who knows, Alpha, in New York University, several of my best professors in NYU are Nigerians. Okay, currently they moved Professor Frankie Edozian, who was a fine journalism professor. Now he's heading NYU in Accra, one of NYU's only campus in Africa, in Accra. He's now heading, he's Nigerian. These people like to dress. These people love their bow and tie. They love their 2 or 3 piece suits. They love to, Oga Abbah, now, and the way they love to put on their boo-boo in what is it about someone who has achieved and has been
in the headline,
and has been head of financial institutions? I mean, sometimes your headline in the way you narrate. Yes, Mr. Abbah, sorry.
Adesina has always been flamboyant. Adesina has always been well-dressed. He was Minister of Agriculture in Nigeria. He was well
Mm.
So I don't think it was because of the African Development Bank that he invested so well.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, exactly. So the man has been himself, and like all these people are mentioning, they are even private individuals. Some are professors, some are, but they dress in their own capacity. And his flamboyance in terms of his outfit should even be a headline on a media and a trusted one like the BBC. What impression are you creating? So a lot of sometimes the way we tell the narration or the way we make stories about our own people also is important. But I'm glad that so far the continent seems to be solid behind him. And I'm glad also that the views from all of you so far is, yes, due process must be followed. But I'm also hopeful that whatever it is, the good works Dr. Abbah of Dr. Adesina is doing, hopefully would clear him out, and eventually he will be able to stand out, and yeah, we'll see where this will go. So again, I'm grateful. On YouTube, Prince Apia Washington says, great discussion. I really enjoy this. Thank you all for all the comments and for your contributions. Until we come your way next week, well, today's discussion from Nigeria, we're joined by Mr. Theo Abbah, and from Ghana, George Wiafe, and in Sierra Leone via the US, it is Alpha Kamara. In Ivory Coast, unfortunately, let me say, Selay Marius Kouassi joined us. He's been trying all this while. I've been reading his messages, and he's been trying to send us messages to say that he's trying to reconnect. Unfortunately, sometimes the technology or internet issue or whatever the challenge, he couldn't stay along. But I think we need to appreciate his time as well. So again, thank you all, and to our viewers, we're very grateful for this. Happy Sunday, everyone, and well,
thank you.
Goodbye to all of you.
Au
Au
revoir.
revoir. Au revoir tout le monde.
Thank you.
Et merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Merci. À bientôt.
À bientôt.